Hello, my bookish friends. Welcome or welcome back. I am Elizabeth. This is Reading Wryly, and today we're going to talk about all of the books that I read in November. Thank you for being here. Thanks for hanging out with me. This is my favorite time, just you and me, just doing our thing, talking about books. At least, you know, in my mind, that's how it is, because really I'm talking to myself.
But let's disregard that for the moment.
This month I read 12 books, which is the most I've read in a while. I've had kind of a lower average lately, so this is kind of cool. I had a pretty damn good reading experience, I'm not gonna lie. I only had one 2-star book. I had 2 3-star books, 3 3.5-star books, 4 4-star books, 1 4.5-star book, and 1 5-star book. As usual, I'm going to start from the lowest rated and work my way up to my favorite book. I'm excited to talk to you about them. But before we do that, I do want to take just a moment to talk to you about the sponsor of today's video, and that is Ana Luisa Jewelry. I know you guys have heard me talk about Ana Luisa before, and I continue to support this brand because I'm proud of this brand. Their purpose is to drive a more conscious, transparent, and inclusive jewelry industry, which not a lot of jewelers are doing. So I think it's really important that we support companies like this. And this is not one of those companies that touts sustainability and then doesn't follow through. They have receipts. Their impact report is readily available on the website. All it takes is one simple click to look through and say, okay, this is how they're sourcing their materials, this is how they're treating their workers. They truly believe that luxury should not be defined so narrowly and designed for so few, which I can fully get on board with and support. Not only that, but it's affordable. Their pieces start from $39, ranging up to higher end pieces. It's elegant, unique, high quality, and there's something for everybody. These are perfect for gifts for the holiday season, for the people that you love, or just for yourself. Just saying. If you go on the website, you will see they have a gift buying guide, and it shows you kind of what are the most popular gifts and different ways to search for gifts for other people. You can add gift boxes if you like. Specifically, I recently have been interested in this kind of layered necklace look, which I'm really loving. This one's the Cardi set, and it's got some weight to it, and it feels luxurious. So when you go in and look at it online, check out the product details. I specifically go in here and I look for ones that are on the longer side, like this one from the Cardi set is the longer one's 19.7 inches, the shorter one's 16 inch. But if you really fall in love with a shorter length piece and you like that longer look like I do, they also sell chain extenders to increase the length. So that's another good option as well. And when you look at these product details, you can see what kind of material it's made from and all kinds of specific information that you might be looking for about the product. I also recently got the Heritage necklace in silver. It's super feminine and versatile. I'm gonna put the link down below in the description box, so check that out. You can use my code ReadingWryly20 for 20% off, which is exciting. This is my first code for anything. I think it's like, this is a landmark moment for me. And without further ado, let's talk about the books that I read in November. I'm gonna start with, like I said, the lowest rated, which is a 2-star, and that is The Long Weekend by Gilly Macmillan. Eek! Bit of a letdown on this one, bit of a bummer, not gonna lie. Let's talk about the audio for this book, because I feel like it was a perfect storm of not working. I'm interested to see how the actual physical book is formatted, because typically there will be, if there's multiple points of view in a story, they will be listed at the beginning of the chapters. That was not the case for the audio for this. And I see the reasoning behind that as far as the way the story is told for a couple specific characters, because there's one perspective that you read from and you're not really sure who it is. So that makes sense to me, but on top of that, the audio narrator did not distinguish her voice between characters. Typically, if you don't have a full cast and you just have one narrator and there's bunch of different points of view, they will at least kind of change their voicing for different characters so it's more easily distinguishable, and that was not the case in this at all. It was a clusterfuck of trying to figure out who the hell I was reading from for the entire book, which made it incredibly confusing. The story itself felt kind of chaotic and messy. The characters felt two-dimensional with too many quirks and not enough nuance. I didn't believe their motives. One character dissociates, which can be something used by authors to kind of create this unreliable narrator, but it never got into detail about why they dissociate other than this like vague excuse, or like even the details of how that works. Do they have multiple personalities, or do they just like zone out a little bit? We don't know. And so it doesn't make sense to me. Another character drinks a bottle of vodka and just stays drunk for what feels like days, which I don't get that either. That doesn't make sense. It's so contrived, this trying to like make the characters unreliable. It's very contrived and there's not enough reasoning for it. And then yet another character is just so weak and fragile, and we have no idea why, except that it relates to her father in her past, and it's just not enough and too much at the same time. I don't recommend this one. I'm just flat out gonna tell you I don't recommend this book. All right, let's move on to my 3-star books. I have 2 of them. The first is The Prisoner by B.A. Paris. I read this in a recent thrillers vlog that I made. I will link that down below and up above as well if you're interested in watching that. Like similar thrillers that involve people with too much money, this can be a little bit over the top, but I think if you have that in your expectation going into it, then you will still enjoy it. This is told in a dual timeline following Amelie in both timelines, and the first one is her past, kind of how she grew up. She was on her own very early and struggling, and so she moved to Paris. In the current timeline, she has found herself kidnapped. She is in total utter blackness. She is starting to think that she feels a little bit safer in this kidnap situation than she did with her new husband, Ned. And so we're following her as the story is being told. The timelines are meeting up. They're getting closer and closer together. So we're hearing things in the current timeline that you see where they started in the past timeline. It really helps the pacing because you just, or for me at least, I just had to know what happened in between those. And so that really kept my interest as I was waiting for the second timeline to catch up. So I liked that. The twist was not as impactful as I might have liked, but it was satisfactory. It's probably not one of those that's going to stick in your head for a while, but I would recommend this for people who are new to thrillers, who don't know kind of every single trope and twist and are expecting it off the bat. The audio narrator was good. The audio production was great. I didn't love the narrator's voice, but that's just a personal thing. It's nothing that would affect your experience listening to the story. The next book I want to tell you about is The Power by Naomi Alderman. Okay, this one's really hard to explain, but I'm going to do my damnedest. This is, first of all, a book within a book. Generally speaking, this book is about power. It's about kind of dissecting power, figuring out what it is. It seems like a feminist book, but I don't think it is necessarily. I think it's just exploring power dynamics in general. What is power? What does it look like? Does it exist before it is used to dominate? And so much more within that. The way this is set up is, like I said, a book within a book. First, we have these 2 authors who are emailing each other. Within this world, women are in power. They always have been since the dawn of time, since anyone knows, for 5,000 years. One of the authors is writing a story, which is in fact the story that we're reading, which is kind of this alternate history of how women came into power. So in their world, they've never heard of the patriarchy. None of that has ever existed. They don't understand what that even means because women can electrocute with their hands. They have powers that come out of their hands, so they are immediately on the top of the hierarchy of the totem pole as far as the power goes. But this man, he's exploring this alternate history where, in fact, there was a patriarchy. In fact, men were in power until women gained this electricity through evolution. So this woman is like, yeah, there's no such thing. Like, that never happened. There's no artifacts. There's nothing to support that. But then as we read this story, we come to learn that the history that we know is based on the people who tell it, and perhaps the women told it. So this isn't necessarily about saying, ha ha, women have power, like you might think. But if women did have power, we'd want to think that they would have more empathy, that there would be less war. But in fact, are women predisposed to thinking that way because we are subordinate, because we live in this patriarchy? If it was reversed, would it be different, or would men be more empathetic? Are we created by our environment because this is socially constructed, can it be socially deconstructed? There's a lot going on there. Now, all of that being said, I want to say that this book was bigger than its britches. I love what it was trying to say, I love what it was exploring, but this could have been like a 6-book series all stuffed into one book. There was too much going on, there was too many politics, there were too many points of view that were confusing. I see what she was trying to do with this and I respect it, but I just didn't love the execution. So that being said, I gave it 3 stars. Let's move on to my 3.5 star books. Okay, this next one I'm excited to tell you about, and that is A Sliver of Darkness by CJ Tudor. This is her anthology book that she came out with this year. Anthology, short story book, I'm not really sure what the difference is, but it's a bunch of little quirky, fun short stories all put into one book, and I had a pretty good time with it. I hate rating anthologies because some of these stories I loved, some of them I didn't. So I just kind of narrowed it down to like a 3.5, but I do recommend a lot of these. I feel like CJ Tudor thrives when she writes from a female perspective, and those tended to be the stories that I gravitated towards more, but a few of the stories that I really did like, there are 11 total. Some of the ones that I loved were End of the Liner, which was the first one, was kind of dystopian, which, you know, I love a dystopian. I'm Not Ted, Final Course, Dust, which that one was like a Hotel California themed where like you're in this hotel and you can never leave. Very interesting concept. And then also The Copy Shop. That one was about this copy shop that can copy anything. And this woman takes her vase in because her friend recommends it and it's broken. And she says, don't worry, they can make a copy of it. And so they do, and it comes back perfect. And then she starts to wonder what else they can copy. And it goes from there. One thing that's really cool about this collection is that CJ Tudor herself introduces each story, kind of tells you where she got the idea from it, where she was at in her life when she wrote it, and it gives you a lot of insight into her as an author. So I definitely would recommend picking this one up if you're interested and checking it out. It was a good time. My next 3.5 star book is Secluded Cabin Sleeps 6 by Lisa Unger. I enjoyed so many aspects of this novel. This is one of those thrillers that kind of give you the pieces to put together along the way. So if you're paying attention, you can figure out the twist as you go, which I like. I like feeling like the detective in the story, but I would have really loved just one little extra zinger at the end that would have just like really solidified this for me. It felt like it could have been inspired by the Golden State Killer, which I loved. The whole central theme of this is kind of family versus genetics. Can we choose our own family, and how can genetics connect us? I originally thought that this was an isolated thriller set in the winter. It's not set in the winter. It's not. I was wrong about that. It's set in the summer, in fact, and there is a storm, but it's not a snowstorm. So I kind of had to like get out of my head about that, but it is isolated. It's isolated in this cabin. You have 6 couples, and you kind of discover as the story evolves how many secrets they have between them. They think that they know each other. Do they really? That kind of thing. The story is set in Florida as well as Georgia. The cabin that they're in is in Georgia. But I really liked the descriptions of Florida. You can completely tell that Lisa Unger lives in Florida or is a native Floridian, I'm not sure. It just really felt nostalgic to me and took me back to like family vacations to Florida. I actually have a lot of family in Florida as well, so I've been there quite a few times. And so the descriptions were on point. There are a lot of different POVs. 2 of them are seemingly unrelated to the story. So you kind of have to figure out how they connect to these other people as you're reading, which did help with the pacing. I felt like it was fairly fast-paced. The writing was good. I enjoyed the prose for the most part. Unger is obviously a seasoned writer. She described family as bound imperfectly but indelibly, which I thought was really apt, and I liked that. But there were a few words like virile and akimbo, which felt really overused and kind of, it could have been just because I was listening to the audio and I read this in one day, but it felt like I kept getting hit with those same words. I was like, okay, chill out on this a little bit. Generally speaking, I had a good time with the story. I would definitely recommend this, and I'm looking forward to reading more from this author. Next, we have Dark Roads by Chevy Stevens. Honestly, I read this at the beginning of the month. I don't remember too much about it, and I didn't immediately write a review, which I need to do because that's like my reference throughout. But it's a thriller about this really snarky, capable woman, I think she's in like her late teens. She has just this tragedy where her father died, and so she has to go live with her uncle, I believe it was, and he is a cop and he's really harsh and she doesn't like him. things start to unfold within their family, but also in more of a macro sense, there are women who are disappearing. And the author connected this to the real life story of Indigenous women who have gone missing that is now referred to as the Highway of Tears. So I really like that connection. This was a really cool fictionalized nod to women who are often overlooked. So I thought that was cool. It was well written and engaging, though not exceptionally memorable. Like I said, I don't remember the details of this, but I do remember having a good time with it. And I would definitely recommend this for people who like reading thrillers from the perspective of strong female characters. Let's move on to my 4-star books. I have, how many do I have? One? I have 4, I think. A classic. I finally got to it. It's Psycho by Robert Bloch. I knew the story, I knew the twist, so I was reticent going into it, but this was a good time. It's everything that I wanted and expected it to be. Mary Crane has committed a crime and is on the run. She's driving and driving and driving, and she stops at this motel, the Bates Motel, to get a little bit of shut-eye, but she does not expect to meet Norman Bates. And Norman Bates is an interesting character. This book is incredibly psychological. You get into his head and it's dark, super interesting. If you don't know the twist, I'm not going to tell you because even though obviously most people probably know by now, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, but if you don't know the twist, oh my gosh, read this book because it's so good. If I hadn't known the twist, I think my mind would have been blown. But since I did, I was able to kind of go into it with more of a analytical headspace, and that was fun too, just having the experience. So yeah, we're just following Norman Bates and this motel that he runs with his mom. There's this side story of this woman who's disappeared. The people who care about her are looking for her, as well as some other people. So very interesting, good read, solid 4 stars. My next 4-star book is The Housemaid by Freida McFadden. I've heard such polarizing opinions about Freida McFadden. This was my first time reading a book from her, and this was recommended by Ashley from Ashley's Little Library. She had a good time with it, and I thought, you know what, I'm gonna pick it up. You know what, I have it here. This is a really fun, twisty domestic thriller. If you are a fan of domestic thrillers, you should probably read this. Is it a little bit tropey? Yeah. Is it a good time? Oh yeah, absolutely. We're following Millie in first person, who's on parole from prison, where she has been for I think 10 years. She's living in her car, she's desperate for a job, and no one will hire her because of her conviction. She finds this nanny position for this well-to-do family, and she applies thinking it's probably useless, but why the hell not? They live in this affluent suburb of New Jersey, I believe it was. Perfect husband, who is, of course, very sexy, and they have a daughter. Millie gets there, she interviews with Nina, and it goes really well, and surprisingly, she gets the job. So she gets there and she starts learning some things about Nina that she doesn't quite like, but she's so desperate that she's willing to kind of put up with anything in order to keep this job because it pays well. She has a place to live. She doesn't have to live in her car anymore. And so she's like, you know what, whatever she throws at me, I'm going to come back because I'm determined. Kind of unfolds from there. I want to compare it to a book, but I feel like if I do that, it's going to give away the twist. So I'm going to refrain. Classic domestic thriller. Just keep that in mind. And I think you will really enjoy the twist in here. My next 4-star book is Reprieve by James Hahn Matson. I finally got around to reading this book. It was not what I expected it to be, but I loved it. This is not like a thriller. Don't go into this thinking it's a thriller. This is more on the literary side. It has so much to say. Don't expect this to slap you in the face, but it does. I would say it qualifies as social horror. I also read this because I heard there was a locked room situation, which there is. That is not a lie, but most of the story does not happen within that locked room situation, so it's not going to be your typical locked room thriller mystery, what have you. I'm not really sure how to talk about this. I felt a roller coaster of emotions throughout. There were times when I felt a little bit bored, like it was a little bit slow moving, and there were other times where I was so invested and emotional. I can definitely see a lot of people DNFing this if they don't get far enough into it to get to a point where it's impactful, because once you do get to that point, it is really impactful, but it took a while to get there. One thing that did keep my interest is that there was a lot of talk about horror books. One of our characters in here is a huge Stephen King fan and a huge horror fan, so for horror lovers, that definitely keeps your attention. It does spoil I think, at least 3 Stephen King books, so keep that in mind, but they're relatively well-known ones. I think most people already know those things. But, you know, if you're worried about it, look it up. There were just so many small moments throughout that were just so cleverly crafted, focusing on 4 or 5 different people who all are involved in this haunted house escape room thing. But the narrative goes far enough back so that you really get to know these characters. There were times when I rooted for all of them and times when I hated all of them. But I think that's the point of all this, is to show some nuance and give some insight into the human experience. And I love that because I think all people are gray. No one's good, no one's evil, everyone's gray. And this really does delve into that discussion. There's also an underpinning discussion about what it means to be other, or more specifically, non-white. It's about blame, it's about humanity, it's about grace, and it forces the reader to look deeper into their own selves and their own behavior. A quote on the jacket says, "The brilliance of James Hahn Matson's novel is in deploying the haunted house as a metaphor for our nation, where the true scare is a cultural reckoning with whiteness itself." And so, yeah, that is, I feel like, sums this up really well. All right, my last 4-star book is Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. I've been hearing good things about this for a long time, but I didn't pick it up because I'm not typically interested in haunted house books. It has to be done just right in order for me to enjoy it, and this one really was. It was weird. It was weird as hell, and I loved it. This actually kind of reminded me of Mexican Gothic in some of its descriptions. I'm sorry if you hear Denver tippy-tapping around. But yeah, some of the descriptions were just kind of like gross, which I thought was great. I do agree with some other reviewers saying that part of the premise and the synopsis of this is a little bit spoilery for some of the books. So I do recommend going into this blind if you can. If you've heard nothing about it, just read it. No, it's a haunted house story and it's weird. That's all you need to know. Our protagonist is Vera. She's going back to the house that she grew up in, where some terrible things happened when she was a kid. And we get kind of a dual timeline almost. We get flashbacks from her when she was a kid. We get current day when she's going back to this house, the Crowder house. And you never really know if you can trust her or not. So that kind of adds to the atmosphere of this, which I loved. I would recommend the audio for this one. It's narrated by X.E. Sands, who's another one of my favorite audio narrators, and she does do specific voices for each character, so it's really easy to tell who is talking and who is not. And she creates this sense of depth in her voice that really brings the characters to life. This story is weird as hell, know that going in, but in the best way possible. All right, let's move on to my 4.5-star book, and that is Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulic. I read this for my recent release thriller video as well, and I had a really good time with this. This is another one where I wasn't sure if I was going to completely be into it because is it paranormal? Is it not paranormal? That kind of trope. And was it going to be done the right way for me to appreciate it? Also, I had to wait forever because I had to buy a copy of the book. Like, I had the audio for so long and I kept hearing good reviews and I didn't pick it up because I know there are illustrations throughout this book and I wanted to make sure I got the full experience, which I absolutely did. I recommend the audio as well as the physical book. Having both at the same time, the perfect experience in my opinion, although you don't need the physical book. There is nothing plot-wise or character-wise that you're going to miss out on if you don't have these pictures to look at as you go, but it does add to that kind of creepy atmosphere. So I would recommend it, but it's not necessary. In the story, we're following Mallory Quinn, who is fresh out of rehab, I think 18 months or so. So not that fresh, but again, wow, actually I'm just now realizing the similarities between this and The Housemaid, because she's fresh out of rehab, not out of prison, but she's having a hard time finding a job. She gets the opportunity to be a nanny for this affluent couple. Is this set in Jersey too? It might be.
Interesting.
Anyway, totally different stories, but domestic thriller nonetheless. So she gets this opportunity to work for the Maxwells. They have a 5-year-old boy named Teddy. Teddy's super sweet. He loves to draw. And so she starts this kind of like a fresh start for her, like a fresh new lease on life. She's loving it. She lives in their pool house, their little cottage out back. She's doing her best to stay on the straight and narrow. But what I was getting at is that the way it's presented, Mallory, she's in recovery. She's gone through AA. She believes in God. She is a believer and a Christian. So she is more apt to believe that when Teddy starts to draw odd things, they are being a message that's sent to her from a ghost. I feel like I'm kind of skipping over things here. Teddy's drawings start to get better and better and better, and she thinks that she's being sent a message from somebody who died in the cabin that she's staying at like 80 years ago. Now, the Maxwells, they're atheists, so they don't tend to believe this. And so there's this dichotomy set up from the beginning between these two people where Mallory is a believer and the Maxwells are not. Now, I thought it lacked a little bit of nuance because I don't necessarily think that if you are an atheist, you can't believe in ghosts. Just gonna put that out there. But I can see why it was used that way, and I can see how that adds to kind of the telling of the story. The story is told through Mallory's perspective, first person. So you really get to know her better than the other characters. You're in her head. And the audio narrator was amazing for this. Perfection. Loved the audio. It's kind of like a popcorn thriller. You really don't have to think too hard about this. It's just sit down, relax, have a good time. This could be a beach read easily. There is something about the twist that I think I should mention. I will not spoil it, but some people think it's problematic. I personally do not think it's problematic, although I am not of that population. So if you are interested, find an own voice reviewer and see what they think. But personally, I don't think it's exploitative, but I do think that it's using something that is just part of our lives now and part of society as kind of a scapegoat. So keep that in mind. Yeah, that's all I can say without really spoiling it, but just kind of giving you that just in case. I know I'm late on this one, but if you have not gotten around to reading this, I had an awesome time with it. I think it's a great book. I think it's a great story, well written, and a fun read. 4.5 stars. Now onto my 5-star book. The one you've been waiting for. This one is not, again, kind of like Reprieve, not what I thought it was going to be going in. I thought this was a thriller. I don't think this is a thriller. It's Any Way You Run by Wanda M. Morris. This is her newest book. She wrote All Her Little Secrets, I think it's called, last year or the year before. Really loved that one. That one is more of a thriller, I would say. This one is historical. It's set in 1960s, Jim Crow South. We're following 2 Black women. And so it's social horror in a sense that it's actually talking about horrors in a social aspect. But in social horror, you would typically think that there would be some kind of metaphorical connection to like a monster or some other kind of ghost or aspect of horror. That's not the case. This is literal in-your-face horror that Black people had to go through in the South in the 1950s, 60s before that, and how that kind of, I guess it's not how it continues today, but like it does, let's be real. In current day, these things are kind of underpinned in society. They are not obvious. They're not out in the open. They're written into our policy, and discrimination still happens, of course, but it's not blatant and outright like it was in the 1950s and 60s. And oh my God, it's devastating to read about. It's honestly like, as a white woman reading this story, like you are forced to sit in it, something that I would never have had to experience, and that is so close in recent history. 60 years ago this was. It's not even that long ago. It's within my parents' life. Like, it's just astonishing, the depravity. Don't get me started. I'm still angry. Like this, I'm not gonna get into it. It makes you angry though. I'll just put it out there. But anyway, we're following these 2 women. We get both of their perspectives. They're sisters, and they both have different reasons for trying to get from Jackson, Mississippi up north. Meanwhile, there's somebody that's following them that's hot on their trail and that's trying to get them. They are dealing with generational trauma. They're dealing with having lost their parents and their sister. One of them feels very responsible for that, and she takes that with her everywhere she goes. There's no like twist in here like a traditional thriller, but the plot is inventive and interesting enough that it very much keeps your interest. It's just so important. I love that Wanda M. Morris wrote this, and she does give a foreword at the beginning stating clearly like there's language used in this that was used in this time. I don't talk like this, but it is in there because it's authentic to the time. So I'm letting you know a lot of the language in there is uncomfortable. It's a very uncomfortable read, but it's so important and it's so well done and well written that there was no way I could not give this 5 stars. There's just no way. I was so emotionally attached to these characters at the end. It's very character driven. And by the end, I was rooting for them. I was just heartbroken for them. It just sucked me into this story and stole me away for the time that I was reading it. And so yeah, 5-star book, highly recommend. absolutely think you should pick this up. Not only is it entertaining, but it's important. And those are all the 12 books that I read in November. Gosh, we're already into December as of filming, and so I'm feeling a little bit behind, but I am planning some more content than usual throughout the month of December. So if you are still with me, first of all, thank you. I appreciate you. But also stay tuned, subscribe if you haven't already. I've got coming up my most anticipated thriller and horror books of Q1, that's January through March. I've got the best of the year. I've got other book lists as well. It's gonna be a good time. Also, bloopers. Bloopers will be coming.
And they're interesting.
And don't forget, if you are looking for a special gift this holiday season for yourself or a loved one, check out my link down below at Ana Luisa Jewelry and use my promo code READINGWryly20 for 20% off. Anyway, that's it for me today, y'all. Don't forget that life is short, so read Wryly. Cheers and goodbye.